It began at 5 p.m. on the 22nd of April 1915 near Ypres. The Germans opened 5,730 cylinders and released 168 tons of chlorine gas. A greenish-yellow cloud, heavier than air, rolled across no man's land and poured into the Allied trenches. French and Algerian troops broke and ran, leaving a 4-mile gap in the line. Those who couldn't run simply drowned in their own lungs. British soldier Arthur MP watched it happen. The gas, he wrote, seemed to eat into the men's throats and lungs, turning them into writhing, gasping creatures. Men coughed up thick green froth. Their faces turned blue. Their eyes swelled shut. Some tore off their own collars trying to breathe. The first gas was chlorine, simple, brutal. Then came fascine, invisible and 10 times deadlier. And in July 1917 the ultimate horror arrived, mustard gas. It didn't need to be inhaled. One drop on your skin and blisters the size of your fist formed within hours. It burned eyes blind, stripped the lining from lungs, and turned a man's genitals into raw meat. The worst part, mustard gas lingered for days. A soldier could walk through a quiet field hours after an attack and suddenly collapse, coughing blood. Wilfred Owen, the greatest poet of the war, survived a gas attack and wrote the lines every schoolchild should be forced to read. Gas, gas, quick, boys. An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or lime, dim through the misty panes and thick green light. As under a green sea, I saw him drowning. Over 1.3 million men became gas casualties. 90,000 never recovered. And the terrifying thing, gas didn't kill quickly. It killed you slowly, over hours or days, while your comrades watched helplessly. You died knowing exactly what was happening to every cell in your body. If gas was the silent killer, artillery was the screaming executioner. The British alone fired over 170 million shells during the war. German guns answered in kind. A single 5.9-inch howitzer shell could create a crater 20 feet wide and 12 feet deep. When it exploded, white-hot shrapnel tore through flesh and bone like paper. The worst was the waiting. You heard the distant thump of the gun, then nothing until the shell arrived faster than sound. Veterans learned to count the seconds. If the shell whistled, it was going over your head. If it screamed, it was coming for you. Private Harold Saunders of the 8th Royal Fusiliers described one barrage at the Somme. The air was filled with the most awful screaming and moaning. Men were blown to pieces before your eyes. One moment a man was there, the next, just a red mist and a pair of boots. Some men weren't killed outright. They were buried alive. Shells would collapse trench walls, entombing soldiers in mud and timber. Rescue parties sometimes dug for hours only to find their comrades had suffocated. Others were dug out still alive only to be buried again the next day. One British sergeant was buried 3 times in a single week and kept fighting. Most weren't so lucky. Artillery caused more deaths than any other weapon. Roughly 60% of all casualties on the Western Front. But the real horror was psychological. The constant concussion shattered nerves. Men sat shaking, unable to speak, eyes vacant. Doctors called it shell shock. We call it PTSD. Some never spoke again. On the 1st of July 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, British troops were ordered to walk across no man's land in straight lines. The Germans waited behind their machine guns. In the first hour alone, 20,000 men fell. By nightfall the total reached 57,470. More casualties in one day than the British Army had suffered in the entire Boer War. The Vickers and Maxim guns fired 500 rounds per minute. Barbed wire thick, rusty, and 10 feet deep stopped the attackers cold. Men hung there like laundry on a line while bullets stitched them from groin to throat. Those who made it through the wire were cut down in waves. Lieutenant Basil Henriquez watched from a forward post. Wave after wave of men went forward and were mown down like corn. The noise was so great you couldn't hear your own voice, but you could hear the bullets hitting flesh. The terror wasn't just dying, it was watching the man in front of you suddenly jerk upright, then collapse, then the man behind him do exactly the same. You kept walking because the officers behind you had revolvers pointed at your back. Many soldiers said the worst moment was stepping over the bodies of their friends, still warm, and knowing in 30 seconds it would be their turn. 3rd Ypres, July to November. 1917, the battlefield became a swamp so deep that men who slipped off the duckboard paths simply vanished. The official British history called it a sea of liquid mud. Soldiers described it as worse than any nightmare Dante could imagine. A wounded man fell into a shell crater and his equipment dragged him under. Comrades heard his screams for hours but couldn't reach him. Without risking the same fate, one Canadian soldier wrote home, "I saw a man disappear up to his neck. We tried to pull him out with rifles, but every time we moved, he sank deeper. In the end, he just looked at us, said, 'Tell my mother I died game,' and the mud closed over his face. Horses, mules, guns, entire battalions, everything sank. The smell of decomposing bodies mixed with the sulfur of the mud. Men who survived said the worst part was the silence after the scream stopped. You knew another friend was gone, swallowed whole by the earth itself. Over 400,000 British and Commonwealth troops became casualties at Passchendaele. Many of them never even saw the enemy. The mud claimed them first. If you were lucky enough to survive the gas, shells, mud, and bullets, one final horror waited for the wounded, the rats. They grew enormous on a diet of corpses. Soldiers measured some at 18 inches from nose to tail. They swarmed at night. If you were wounded and lay in no man's land, unable to move, they came for you while you were still alive. A British stretcher bearer at Verdun recorded, "I heard a man screaming in the dark. When we reached him at dawn, the rats had already eaten his face and hands. He was still conscious. He begged us to shoot him. Even in the trenches, rats attacked sleeping men. They gnawed through boots to reach toes. They carried disease, trench fever, tetanus, gangrene. A small wound that might have healed became a black, stinking horror within days. Surgeons amputated limbs by candlelight in flooded dugouts just to try to save lives. Many men died anyway, screaming as the infection climbed toward their hearts. The combination of rats and infection turned the trenches into a laboratory of slow torture. You could die in minutes from a shell, from rats and gangrene. It took days, sometimes weeks of pure agony. These 5 horrors weren't exceptions. They were the daily menu of the Western Front. Men endured them for long years. Some wrote poetry. Some wrote letters home that their families never saw because the censors destroyed them. Some simply broke. When the armistice came at 11 a.m. on the 11th of November 1918, the guns fell silent, but the echoes never stopped. The war poets, the shell-shocked veterans, the widows, the orphans, they all carried pieces of that hell with them for the rest of their lives. We study these stories not to glorify war, but to understand its true cost, because the moment we forget how cheap life became in those trenches, we risk letting it become cheap again. That's the story of hell on earth, the 5 most terrifying ways to die in the trenches of the First World War. If this episode hit you as hard as it hit me while researching it, do 2 things right now. First, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. Second, drop a comment below and tell me, which of these 5 deaths do you think was the absolute worst and why? Next time on Echoes of War, we're going to the Eastern Front to meet the frozen hell of the Brusilov offensive. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching. Share this video with someone who needs to remember why we must never romanticize war. And remember the words carved on so many headstones across Flanders: they shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. I'm your host from Echoes of War. Stay curious, stay respectful, and I'll see you in the next trench. Subscribe because history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure as hell rhymes. Take care.